Good morning, a good night. This is Sunday morning, fifth day of Sukkot, Baruch Hashem. Today we're starting with Sheviis. Yes, we're learning Sheviis on Sukkot, not to confuse the holiday. Sheviis refers to the Shemitah year, which is the seventh year. Today's share is sponsored by the Nishmas Aaron Nachum ben Sucha Koyin, Shul Mordechai ben Shepsel, Baruch Sarva Shmuel Lev, Rabbi Moshe ben Yosef. May the stars have an aliyah. Amen. And before Shlem of Adus Sarah Bas Leib, so Shar Chali Yisrael. Masechet Shvius starts is all about the laws of Shemitah, and you have different psukim in different parts of the Torah. You have in I think it's Mishpatim, it talks about Shemitah, and then in Bahar it talks about Shemitah, and then Re'eh it talks about Shemitah, which we're going to read tomorrow. We're going to read on Shmiyah Sereth. You read about, I think you read about Shemitah, and maybe not. I'm a little tired. I apologize. Um, but it's not only about Shemitah, the land, it's also about Shemitah's Kesafim, where loans get canceled. That's in like the last chapter. Anyways, we're going to jump right into this. We're going to talk about start Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. So the Torah in Parshas Bahar says that clearly says that we may not work our fields in Eretz Yisrael on the seventh year, during the seventh year. That begins on the first of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah. But the prohibition to plow a field begins earlier at the end of the sixth year, before Rosh Hashanah starts. So this chapter talks about the fields of trees, such as an orchard, and fields of trees are plowed even when they are fully grown, so that the water absorbed in the ground should go deeper into the ground. So now we're going to talk about when that's no longer permitted. So until when may we plow a field of trees during the year before Shemitah? Shammai says, Kozman Shu Yafa the Peri. You're allowed to plow as long as it is beneficial to the fruit of the sixth year. There's no set time of the prohibition. Rather, at whatever time is no longer beneficial to the existing crop, then the plowing is forbidden. That's according to Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel omrim ad hatzeres. Beis Hillel says you only plow until Shavuos, the 7 weeks after Pesach. That's a fixed deadline, unlike Beis Shammai, who says it's subjective. Beis Hillel says it's a deadline that after Shavuos, that the plowing is no longer beneficial to that year's crop. Therefore, it's assumed that's for next year's crop. And the opinions of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are very close, um, to being the same, because the time when plowing is no longer considered beneficial is generally around Shavuos time. So you're only talking about a matter of a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks between the two of them. But so the difference being is that Beis Hillel is a fixed deadline, and Beis Shammai is more subjective. Mr. Bays, so what is considered to be a field of trees? We talk about a field of trees. But what is a field of trees? Kol shlosha ilanos tevesa, any field that contains at least three trees planted within the besa area, meaning it's about 2,500 square amas. If each tree is fit to produce a block of pressed figs that weighs the equivalent of 60 Italian mana. What's an Italian mana? Well, a mana is equivalent to 100 dinars. The Italian mana, what's a dinar? We talk about dollars and shekel in today's day and age. We want to know what dinars are really. The Italian mana weighed at the equivalent of 9,600 grains of barley. How much does a grain of barley weigh? I never actually counted. When you buy barley for Shabbos for the tzon, I never actually counted how many grains were in that pound of barley, so I have no idea. Let's see. It was roughly a base. 1 second. That each it's based on the size and the strength of the trees. And each tree could produce enough figs that, when dried and pressed together, would weigh 60 mana, which is 63 pounds. The surrounding base is considered to be a field of trees. This mission uses the Italian mana as a standard because its weight was identical to that of the coin used in the times of Moshe. Very interesting. That's according to the Bartanura. So let's see. Where am I? 3. Okay. Chorish and Ko base sub is true. We're still in Mishnah base. We may plow the entire base sub for their benefit even after Pesach until around Shua's time, as he mentioned in Mishnah Aleph. Pachas Mikan, however, if they produce less than this amount, Ein Chorish in the head below Ha'ora with Salu Chutzulo, then the field is not considered to be a field of trees, and we may plow for their benefit only the area around the trees that is directly beneath the branches, as well as the amount of space outside of each tree that one who is just harvesting and his basket takes up. I mean, that's about that amount of space. Once Pesach arrives, only this area around each tree may be plowed. The rest of the field may no longer be plowed. Going on to Mishnah Gimel. Echad Ilan Sirak, Echad Ilan Machel. This applies whether they are non-fruit trees. You have a lot of trees that do not bear fruit, or you have any type of tree that produces fruit. Rowan Osan Kido Hain to Enim. We view them as if they were fig trees. Thus, if fig trees of such a size would each produce a loaf of pressed figs weighing 60 diamana, Korshin Kol base sub is feeling. Then we may plow the entire base sub for their benefit after Pesach until the time stated in Mishnah Aleph. However, if the fig trees of such a size produce less than this amount, we may plow only their need, meaning that their immediate surroundings. It doesn't qualify to be a field of trees. Mishnah Daled. So what qualifies to be a field of trees? We're going to discuss that. Nahaya echad osa kikar devela ushnayim ein osa. If one of the trees produces a block of pressed figs, but the other two do not produce the amount, oshnayim osim echad ein osa. Or even if two of the trees produce that amount, but one does not produce that amount, ein charish lahem elo tzarch. We may plow for the trees only as much as their individual needs, mean their immediate surroundings, not the entire base sub. Since not all the trees are large enough, and the field is not considered to be a field of trees. So this requirement that each tree must be large enough to produce a block of dried figs applies when the field contains between 3 and 9 trees. However, if there were 10 or more than 10 trees in the field, then regardless of whether they produce the minimum amount of fruit or they do not produce the minimum amount of fruit, we may plow the entire base sub for their benefit because when you have 10 or more trees, it's considered to be a field of trees, regardless of the amount that the trees produce. Once you have 1 million of trees, then that's good to go. So what's the source for the prohibition of plowing the rest of the base saw? As it says in the pasuk in Shmos, in Mishpatim. It says 6 days. It says 6 days you shall work, and the 7th day you shall rest. During plowing and during harvesting, you shall rest. This is not exactly referring to Shemitah itself. It's more regarding to Shabbos, Um, but the words the charish to tishbos, right? Why are you sticking in charish to tishbos to the isser of Shabbos? I'll look at the pasuk right now. This is thank you, thank you. Lamed, Lamed, Dalid, Lamed, Dalid, Lamed, Dalid. Ah, we read this on Shabbos actually. It's part of Shabbos is created. Shabbos Chol I think. Sheishes Yamin Tavod, Yom Hashvi Tishbos, Becharish V'Kaz Tishbos. 6 days you should work, and the 7th day you should rest. And when plowing, during harvesting, you should rest. So the first part of the pasuk obviously refers to Shabbos itself. What's the pasuk throwing in the plowing and the harvesting? I mean, we already learned that from a different part of the Torah. So why is it throwing that over here? Therefore, it must be according to the Rosh that these 3 words of Becharish, Bechat, Tishbos are referring to Shemitah, where even during the week it's prohibited to plow. But there's no need for the pasuk to teach us that plowing and harvesting are prohibited during the actual Shemitah year. That's also in the Torah. So, because we learned that in Bahar. So what's going on here? The regular year we don't need to talk about because that's not negaya to a regular year. We're only talking about the Shemitah year because that's in part of Bahar. So what are we teaching over here? So the Mishnah continues, El Charish shall erev Sheviis shehu nichnas b'Shvius. Rather, the pasuk is talking about prohibiting the plowing on the erev Shemitah, like that the 6th year, who's when you do the work that it enters into Shemitah. So if you're plowing during the 6th year, that's going to benefit the Perek Shemitah. Then that's a problem according to these 3 words in the pasuk in Kisisa, which you read on Shabbos. The katzir shall Sheviis who yotze the motzei Sheviis, as well as the Tosefah Shemitah. Like you have Tosefah Shabbos every week. It's also Tosefah Shemitah, where when you're harvesting the 7th year's crop, or that was either planted unlawfully or that grew on its own from seeds accidentally left on the ground that extends into the year following Shemitah. Therefore, the plowing before Shemitah is prohibited if the crop be harvested during Shemitah, and the harvesting of Shemitah crop is prohibited even after Shemitah. Bereshmal disagrees with part of this. He says, because of the plowing the Torah prohibits on Shabbos is voluntary. Meaning I cannot be speaking of a case where there's a mitzvah obligating a person to plow, since there's no case in the Torah where there's a requirement to plow. You don't have to plow during the week. If you're not a farmer, you're not going to plow. So too, the harvest in the Torah prohibits on Shabbos is voluntary. Therefore, the prohibition applies only to harvesting that is not a mitzvah. So therefore, this excludes harvesting barley for the Omer. This excludes harvesting barley for the Omer, which is a mitzvah. The pasuk teaches us that this is permitted even on Shabbos. That's according to every Shmuel. Because you can harvest the Omer on Shabbos, but you can't do any other harvesting on Shabbos. That's just the 16th of Nisan is on a Shabbos. It's not on the 16th of Nisan. If the 16th of Nisan is not on a Shabbos, then you cannot harvest the Omer, obviously. Mishnah Hey, Shlosha Ilana Shlosha Anashim. The base of field contains 3 trees that belong to 3 different people. They nevertheless combine to form a field of trees, and we may plow the entire base for their benefit. Rather than viewing each tree as an individual tree growing on its own plot of land, we view the trees as if they all belong to one owner. Thus, the field is considered a field of trees. How much is the minimum amount of space that there must be between the trees for the field to be considered a field of trees? Bengalil says, "Kaday she had bakar over bekelav." There must be enough space for the cattle to pass through with their plowing equipment. Meaning that there has to be enough space between the trees to allow a pair of oxen, which takes up a lot of space, and they're pulling when they're yoked together, they're pulling a plow. So that distance is 4 amos. You need to make sure there's enough space between the trees that they can go. Otherwise, it's not considered to be a field of trees. Mishnah Vav, Eser Netios Mifuzaros B'Self Beisa. If 10 saplings are growing throughout a Beisa, Chorshin Kol Beisa B'Shvilan Arosh Hashanah. We may plow the entire Beisa for their benefit on Rosh Hashanah, unlike a field of mature trees, which may be plowed when 3 trees are growing in the field. A field of saplings is considered a field of trees only when there are 10 saplings growing there. On the other hand, while a field of mature trees may be plowed only until Shavuos, a field of saplings may be plowed on the entire 6th year until Rosh Hashanah. However, if the 10 saplings were not growing throughout the field, but were growing instead in a single line, or were surrounded by a fence, we may plow for them only their needs, that is, their immediate surroundings. We may not plow the entire field, because if we were to plow the areas of the field beyond the line of saplings or outside the fence, it would appear as if the field was being plowed to prepare for next year, which is Shemitah, rather than for the sake of the sapling. And 2 more to go. Hanatios, Vahadaluim, the start from the self base up. Saplings and Greek gourds combined for the count of 10 saplings in the base up, even though the field does not contain 10 saplings itself, but the count can be completed with the gourd plants. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, "Kol asara delun the beisa." He says, even if there are 10 gourd plants to a beisa, let any saplings chorshin kol beisa at Rosh Hashanah. We may plow the entire beisa until Rosh Hashanah. Finally, Mishnah Ches. Aside nikro netios. Until when are trees considered saplings? Rabbi Omer ad sheyecholu. Rabbi Azariah says until their fruit becomes deconsecrated from the status of net the revai. Net the revai is the 4th year. The first 3 years it's orla. The first 3 years of a tree's life is called orla. You can't use the fruit. Not that there's any fruit in the first 3 years. Anyways, the 4th year is called net the revai, and as kedusha, it must be eaten in Yerushalayim. If he doesn't want to transport it to Yerushalayim, he could depot it like he's deported from Meshacheni. But after the 4th year, the tree has no special status, and you can eat the fruit. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Bas Sheva Shana. Rabbi Yeshua says until the trees are 7 years old, it's considered a sapling. Rabbi Akiva Omer Netia Kishma. Rabbi Akiva says a sapling is as its name suggests until it's 1 year old. And finally, Ilan Shenigmam Hotzi Chalip. If a mature tree was chopped down and its stump grew new branches, Mitefach ulamata kinetziah. If the top of the tree stump is less than a tefach above the ground, the new growth is considered a new sapling. In this case, the remaining stump is not significant. Therefore, the new growth sprouting from the stump is viewed as a completely new tree and is considered a sapling. However, if the height of the stump is a tefach or more, the new branches are viewed as part of the original tree. Thus, have the halacha status of a mature tree. Rabbi Shimon, these are according to Rabbi Shimon. That is the end of Perek Aleph. We will see you tomorrow, Shana Rabbah, for Perek Beis of Sheviis. Have a wonderful day. Agita Ma'id.